Oh, hello. Fancy seeing you here on a Monday morning, but glad you could join us. Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Each week, we will be interviewing local, regional, and national business leaders to give you an inside peek into how they lead their businesses to success in an ever-competitive business climate. So pour yourself a hot cup and enjoy the show. Welcome to another episode of Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Today I have two guests. So there are three people on the podcast today. I have Kurt Neiswender and Jamie Crawley, and they are the co-hosts of the Coffee Sketch podcast. Coffee Sketch podcast is their take on the intersection of old tech and new tech, the space between the traditional practice of the hand-drawn sketch that has been performed by architects and designers for centuries, and the modern-day use of the hashtag as a representation of the sentiment of or a movement. Each week, they deliver a new episode about their ideas, sketches, and what is going on in their daily lives as they pursue their love of architecture, design, and sharing this knowledge with the next generation. Welcome to the show, fellas.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
That's our intro for the podcast.
But it's
it took
perfect.
me a lot of attempts to say it without jumbling my words. So
Yeah, no, it's good.
To hear it. Yeah.
I couldn't think of a better way to introduce you guys, honestly, because I kind of want, I like doing, bringing other podcasters on. They seem to do pretty well orally. So with that, why don't you guys? How did you guys get to know each other? How did you guys cross pollinate and start the podcast?
Sure. Well, Jamie, you want to start? Or you want me to do it?
You can start and I'll interrupt you like I always do.
There you go.
Yeah. So, Jamie and I first met while both serving on the Young Architects Forum. So I'm in Michigan, he's in Texas, and we were on the representing as Young Architect Regional Directors. And I think you probably know a few others or have interviewed a few others around the country or over time. But so we met at one of the annual meetings that the YAF hosts a face-to-face every year, as long as there's no pandemic. And then we do some, strategic planning for the year. And so we met at, I don't know, I forget how many years, I think at least 6 years ago, maybe 7 now. And we kind of really hit it off as like with a lot of similar interests and became friends very quickly. And, when you do these sort of committee meetings, you then go away back to your hometown, and then you have to communicate via email and all that stuff. And when conferences, the AIA conference came around, we kind of reached out to each other and decided to, asked, if we would room up together, save costs on the conference and things like that. And so, we got along. So that kind of became a tradition that we have now broken because of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
We were really excited to go back to LA, or I was, because I used to live in LA, and I was going to show Jamie around.
I was going to get like a personal tour guide for the conference, which was going to be pretty fantastic.
Yeah, for free, right?
Yeah, for free. Exactly.
Free tours. Yeah. Anyone who wanted, but now no chance for free tours. So, I guess as far as the concept for the podcast was, we were at the New York conference, so that's 3 years ago, I think, and I could be wrong, but
only 2. It feels like 3.
So, there was certain interest in wanting to do something collaboratively together, being that we're in 2 different states, but wanting to sort of do something creative and collaboratively. And Jamie had been very diligently posting what he calls coffee sketches, hashtag coffee sketch, on his Instagram, and it kind of weaves into Twitter and things like that. And people comment and they kind of very thematically, like they're always like a black and white most of the time, black and white image, coffee cup, pen. And it was even the year before. I'll go back one more year to Orlando, and I had my phone, and I was kind of filming Jamie at the one of the expo hall booths, where they invited architects, at the conference to sketch on a coaster and pin it up on the wall. And so that was, maybe the beta of this whole thing. And then fast forward again a year, we kind of brainstormed, like, what if it was some kind of podcast? I think we kind of called it a podcast.
I think that the thing that Kurt was experimenting with the video blog at the time, and was sort of asking me some questions about that, and he was enjoying it, but it wasn't as sort of collaborative as he thought it could be. And he said, what's the next step for these coffee sketches that you have? And I really didn't have one. I was just enjoying doing them as a daily sketch. And as we started to ruminate on that idea in New York, it really became something over the next couple months and turned into this idea of Kurt proposing the idea, hey, you draw every day, you post these sketches, what if I curated them and we started to have a conversation about them? And that sort of became the impetus for the podcast. And that's really the way it's become, is this wonderful kind of conversation between two friends about art, architecture, life, pop culture, using the sketches and coffee as sort of an impetus, and sort of literally a conversation starter.
How do you guys, so you mentioned it was you were experimenting with vlogs. Is it actually in video form? And forgive me for not knowing, but that was because my question really is, like, how do you take something visual like a sketch, keep the audience engaged when it's a non-visual show? Like, I always have to, when I'm talking with Alex, I have to remind myself, this is a terrestrial show. This is not a visual thing.
Right. Well, no, you're correct. It is not a vlog or a video. Right now we just record audio. Although last year at last year October, we got together for the AIA Texas conference and tried to do a live vlog, video, podcast, whatever. We had camera, we had microphones, and Jamie was sketching, and we tried it as an experiment. And it definitely needs a little more polish before we could try and repeat that. But yeah, the
reason for that is that, like, there's been a stretch of sketches where I try and do them really quickly. And so all these coffee sketches are literally with the premise that they're being done quickly. 10 to 15 minutes a sketch. And I do that. I mean, and predominantly that's what I do. So when Kurt and I got together, it was this added dimension of the video that we tried to kind of fold into what the podcast was doing, but that's certainly a work in progress. But yeah, for the podcast itself I think that's the kind of uniqueness to the premise, is that it's two guys talking about architecture and sketches that no one can see.
I love the brutal honesty about it, because, I mean, honestly, everybody listening, I'm sure they were thinking the same thing. Unless, if they haven't heard the episodes before. Jamie, is this part of your morning routine then? Is it, you get up and coffee, and it's like, how long has this been happening? How long have you been doing this?
I've probably it started about 10 years ago, when I was transitioning into a new firm position. I was starting an emerging practice. And so this was something that I started about 10 years ago and was pretty diligent about it. And then it became a situation where someone encouraged me. They said, have you used Instagram? Do you know about this Instagram stuff? And it became this idea that, well, it's an opportunity for me to post something daily about this sort of process. Sometimes it's solitary. Sometimes it's a conversation with other individuals. Sometimes it's a conversation in the studio itself. But yeah, I've pretty much tried to maintain it, over that time period. And like I've joked about on the show is that, and I've put time limits. I put artificial constraints on the sketches at times, because I've used it as a way to get me past those creative blocks as an exercise. And so some of it is hashtag 10-minute coffee sketch or 10-minute sketch. And then I post it, and I joke about it on the show is there's aspects of a sketch where you're 10 minutes in and, 5 minutes in, you're like, this is not going the way I thought it was going to go, but I'm going to post it anyways. So there's an honesty about it that I try and do, with each daily sketch.
Do you ever run it? Do you ever have sketch block? Just like writer's block?
Like right now.
Okay.
Yeah. Like if people have been following the Instagram posts of it, is that, for the last month or so, it's been really, really tough. The creative juices have not been flowing the way that they normally would. And so, it's tricky, but as an exercise, it's one that I've tried to develop to get me past it. When I know that I'm not feeling as creative as I want to be, I will use the coffee sketch as a means to do that. Sometimes the artificial constraints, the rules that I put on it, allow me to do it. Sometimes it's thematic, like Kurt was suggesting. But sometimes you get the writer's block.
Kurt, did Jamie inspire you to? Did it follow your lead, or were you already sort of doing a routine like this every day? And then do you guys both make it an effort to, like, is it just talking about Jamie's sketches, or are you guys both bringing them together and collaborating?
So, good question. It's mostly Jamie's sketches because he's been so regular in posting them. I'm not very regular at posting sketches. I've done a little bit to try and sometimes I've tried to make a sketch and kind of bounce it off of Jamie, and then it becomes something that we can talk about on the podcast. Personally, I'm not a daily sketcher, but I do find other ways that I kind of think of in the concept of a sketch. So we've got a couple of episodes where we talk about something I'm interested in, which is the idea of like that computational design, or utilizing things like Grasshopper and Rhino, is kind of an intriguing premise to me as far as programming design work with this bits of code and things like that. And so I've cobbled together, I'm not super good at it, but I've played around with it and cobbled together some interesting images out of that. And then we kind of flip the interview a little bit, and Jamie kind of picks my brain about some of these things. That's far less frequently, but sometimes. So we've kind of flipped the script, so to speak, in that sense. So it's primarily, we kind of focus on Jamie's sketches, and we can go back in time to pull a sketch out and kind of pop it in front of him after so many years of not.
Kurt recently pulled out a lightning round on me where he said, okay, let's do a Pechakucha style, or Kachka, whatever, I don't pronounce it properly. And he threw out 10 sketches at me, and we did them really, really quickly. So that was fun.
Jamie, you had your own office for a couple of years. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Was there any business inquiries or followers that of you sketching on Instagram? Did that ever translate into any kind of business just by simply putting yourself out there?
Absolutely.
Oh,
absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, no, it was there was definitely, we were a general practice for all intents and purposes. So residential, commercial, did a little bit of public art projects, and I had done some public projects in the past at a previous firm. So certainly on the residential side, for sure, we had several inquiries, and some of those, what was nice was that even some of those residential would turn into commercial work, which is sort of the sweet spot for any general practice of a small size. Is if you can move one from one sector to another sector, and it's the same client base, that's fantastic. It's like marketing to yourself. But yeah, the sketches certainly put out a idea of how I like to work and how I perceived our studio working, both collaboratively, but also just from the standpoint of process, and people really responded to it. I mean, it resonated with certain people.
Oh, definitely. I could see attracting a very specific kind of clientele. I think, them just maybe coming into the firm. It's really one of the things I like to tell my kids, and then also we teach at CU Boulder, is like it's very calming, I think, to just watch people sketch. Like how often do you get to do that process in life? It's I mean, you're just literally watching, I mean, we don't think of ourselves maybe as artists like Picasso, but you are creating art. And so you are just watching somebody create art. I don't think there's anything, for me, I could just sit there and watch somebody draw for a long time. So I wonder if some of the clients that came in, they were expecting that and they really wanted that.
I'm the same way. I mean, that was, it's something I've shared with Kurt and we've talked about a lot, is that I love, that I've found a practice, I've found a field where I can get inspired by so many different people, and the work that they do. And I love to be fanboy to, other architects, other artists who sketch and try and follow as many as that I can. I have certain favorites, of course. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I'll sit there and watch somebody draw. I mean, I love that moment too. I mean, and yeah, I agree that there's been moments where clients do the same thing. They like that process.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead, Kurt.
Well, the thing I find, being that most of the work is Jamie's sketches, it's kind of fun being the observer in the sense, and kind of, and in most cases too, especially if I scroll through his feed and try and grab something from back in time, before I even met him, then I'm looking at something that we've never really discussed, maybe, or kind of find a theme or a concept that has not, is not something he's currently interested in, right? And so, a lot of times he will sketch like client work, but then the next day he's sketching a detail from like a Zaha building, or a favorite architect, or something that he's seen by walking down the street, and sort of create some inspiration. And so what I hope out of the podcast is that by trying to verbally explain the visual, and we try not to get too jargony, we want to try and keep it accessible to everybody, but it's like a connection, from day to day, a thread that ties through, the particular client project he may be working on, or, related to, something from Zaha or Morphosis, or Lebbeus Woods is kind of a popular subject matter for Jamie, or even, things like Banksy's art, right?
Mm-hmm.
The graffiti art. So what's not collaborative, but the broad visual spectrum that would be from art to architecture to furniture or something, or even nature, right? Some, that would be visually inspiring. So we try and hopefully, we can explain enough in the art or the drawings that people can kind of visually paint the picture for themselves. And then we also put a little thumbnail up with every week's episode, so there's at least something.
Oh, that's smart. I like that. Yeah, that makes sense.
A trick from our friend Evan Troxel.
Yeah,
he taught me that one.
Yeah, he's smart. Evan's on top. Evan's on the ball always, right? He's like bleeding edge type of guy. Kurt, there's some other stuff I'd like to talk. Moving sort of beyond the sketches, I think it's fascinating that you guys have found this little niche. I think there's still so much room to grow, even in the podcasting sphere. People like to joke like, "Oh, there's too many." I'm not sure of that, because I still run out of stuff to listen to on the weekends, and then I'll find new stuff and kind of fall in love with it. But moving beyond that, Kurt, you're located in Michigan, correct?
Yep.
And one of the things I liked about your bio that you sent over is that you're very active in your community. I am as well. I run a community garden in town, and I do other things to try to help out and volunteer. And one of your focuses is on the Flint water crisis. At one point in the media cycle, that's all we heard about. And as if somebody's in Colorado, we don't hear about it too often. So like to hear that there's still a problem. Tell us what you've done there, what the current state is with the water in Flint, and are things moving ahead, or are they sort of stagnant?
Sure, I'll try and keep this one in a nutshell. But as far as so I live in the city now. I've been working in the city a little longer. So I've been living in the city 4 years, which basically I moved in kind of right around when things really started to become nationally recognized, but had been working in the city 4 years prior to that. So always spending my days in the city, reading the news and then sort of hearing the press releases. And then I remember a day, kind of making coffee in the office and realizing like, oh, I'm just filling it right out of the tap. And we work out of an old house, so it's not,
We learned in the past episode that Kurt really likes break room coffee and really misses it during this stay-at-home time.
Yeah, the water cooler and the break room coffee. So it just kind of dawned on me that like, okay, we should probably kind of take a look at this and think about filtration. And everyone at that point was trying to figure out what kind of filtration works, right? And then how do you get access to it? So with AI, our local AI component, AI Flint, we did a little bit of infographic kind of creation to help spread the word. Primarily, that was around, and this was to sort of share around the city and around, at different neighborhood groups and things like that. But people were donating water bottle cases, right? Cases of waters. And people were just driving around town collecting as many as they could, and then they would take them home. But it sounds maybe a little simple, but if you start stacking up, because people got into that a little bit scarcity mindset and started to hoard a little bit of, they would go and collect as much as they could on distribution days. But if you stack up those 24 cases, 48 bottle cases of water on your, wood framing, these old houses in Flint, I mean, you could create a structural problem. So we tried to educate people on like, if you're going to stack these things, because there were stories about, really, collections of these water bottles full, so we're, there's that component. And then, just with AIA and trying to help use that platform to get involved with the local government as far as the mayor's office and the council, and be of assistance, get together with our local civil engineering colleagues, engineers and land surveyors, and in the industry, talk about infrastructure and what's that pathway forward. In the end, we architects, I mean, this is kind of the ongoing thing with AIA and our own friends of architecture, that are maybe not so much a big fan of AIA. There's always a range of that, but what the role of an architect is. At the end of all this, what I mean to say is that some of the local engineering firms definitely were involved in the rebuilding of the infrastructure and mapping the piping, where the lead pipes were, and so to date, I guess they have replaced a good many of them. I actually saw an article that there are still lead pipes in existence in the city, but they are in parts of the town where there's not as many people because suffered a decline in population. So there's a lot of empty sections of town. So where there's not, there's maybe buildings there, but not occupied buildings. And so I think, and I would have to pull the statistics up, but there are a lot of the pipes replaced, a lot of it, with a lot of federal funding, state funding to help, do the replacement process. Still something ongoing, but I think with distribution of filtration, water filters at the tap, and then water bottles, which still occurs in a small part, as far as water delivery, well, not delivery, but water availability, and then the pipe replacement. So it's still a thing, but I think the biggest story I think coming out of it is that it definitely made headlines, from Flint and to the national level to the global level, but there are other Rust Belt or legacy cities, areas that had a lot of industrial manufacturing and that have decaying infrastructure. I mean, there's so many layers of infrastructure, right? Bridges, roads, and the underground piping. And so, my hope is that, it sheds some light on this issue in other areas of the country. I know places like Pittsburgh.
Kurt's kind of modest. I mean, he's on this, but he's kind of modest. Kurt really is a citizen architect. I mean, and I think that he's sort of a servant architect in a small community that has been, in the national headlines and isn't out of the woods yet. I mean, I think that they're, we've talked about it quite a bit, but I think that there's some political dimensions to this that he's involved in, and then some community activism that he's involved in that he doesn't like to talk about quite a bit. But I think it's something that, as an architect and in your community, I mean, I think what's interesting for the dynamic between the two of us is that Flint's is potentially very, very different than what Austin is. And so a lot of my questions for Kurt are trying to understand it a little bit better. So I think your question about it is, it was in the headlines. It's not as much anymore because of so many other things, but I think it's something that as a nation we shouldn't lose sight of, because I think there's some resilience issues that people like Kurt and others in the community are still probably dealing with.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I wanted to bring it up, is because I think the way, everybody who actually, you almost can't get away from the media cycle, right? And even if you just move to just Twitter or you cut the cable, it's just bombarding. So when it hits, once they focus on one thing, that's all we hear about for a couple months, and then they throw it away. But that doesn't mean it goes away. And I can't imagine that the problem was entirely solved or anything like that. So we really, really appreciate your take on that, Kurt.
Well, and it was funny because even just last week we were talking about something where there was a video that Kurt's like, hey, we have, I'm going to be busy for a couple hours. I got to go do this drone video. And I'm like, well, what are you doing a drone video of? And he's like, oh, I'm doing a drone video of Black Lives Matter public art project in Flint. And I was like, oh, okay, fantastic. I want to see this when it's done. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to do some editing. And so he posts it and sends it to me. And then I see some other things, and I see a corollary to it. And it was a public art project that he's associated with some individuals there in Flint. And Little Miss Flint, who a lot of people got to know because of the Flint water crisis, she was involved in the project too. And a lot of it was from a public relations aspect of it, of trying to, gain awareness and use her platform. But I think it's something that, fell out of the news cycle. Hopefully, people sort of realize that the problem's not solved. And as Kurt was saying, it's not the only community that's affected.
Right. Kurt, do you have any place where people could, if they're listening to this, do you have like a one site where you could send them if they're interested in helping out, even if it's just donating to stuff on Flint? And I'm sorry to put you on the spot like that, but I thought maybe you do it. If you don't, no problem. People can, I'm sure there's some kind of organizations still going, but
that's a good point. I mean, Jamie did bring up Little Miss Flint. So if you could find her on Twitter.
Okay.
I can give you the links and all that stuff. And then, the City of Flint website. And, I can, have a lot of information on it. And then, I can share those. I think that, getting into the mayor's office, and we have a new mayor that is had a long history in politics in the City of Flint. So he's very, very active and on top of things. I'm really excited about Mayor Neely. So, he is one of those politicians that if people are speaking to him and dropping notes into his office, he will listen and he will respond to them. So it's helps keep everything moving right in the positive direction.
Yeah. So you guys brought up BLM, and I noticed, I think it was you, Kurt, in your bio talking about equity and equality. So I wanted to pick your guys' brain about something. I was recently on a roundtable podcast with Mark and Evan and a bunch of other folks, Demetrius Lynch from Spaces podcast. and we had a guest on there, and there's I don't know if you guys are aware, but and if you are, great, then I'm kind of repeating myself, but equality versus equity. And this gal's idea was, her take was, and it kind of struck me a little bit because I haven't heard this yet. So it's been spinning in my head for a while. And the claim is that equality isn't enough at this point, and that now we need to move to equity. So have you guys, is this just new to me, or are you guys already ahead of the curve on this, with this language that's coming out about equality versus equity, and that it's not enough that we've leveled the playing field in the terms of equality. Now there's equity that has to happen in order for us to get to an equal outcome.
I would say, just sort of quickly, is just like a simple way that I've looked at it, but that I've tried to explain it to other people, is that from an equality standpoint, if we say, okay, we're, a goal is equality, and we're going to start today, treating everybody equal, that's great, but that doesn't sort of take into account all the things that have happened before, and that there are aspects of the system that haven't created an equal footing for people. And so, starting as, this is ground zero, this is the tabula rasa, this is the clean slate, and we're going to move forward from this point isn't enough. And so, both Kurt and I both have been involved in our respective areas, with these initiatives, both professionally, personally, and otherwise. But I think it's certainly language that I've become familiar with, and I'd like to say that I'm still listening, I'm still learning, I'm still probably making mistakes, but I'm trying to do better myself with it, and it's in all aspects. But I think it's sort of taking that, at least the first step of realizing it, because a lot of people will say, well, equality, of course, is very, very important, and they sort of want to stop there. And I think that's when people kind of bring this other term to light, I think it's continuing that conversation. And if people aren't willing to engage in that, then they're missing a really, an opportunity.
Yeah. Kurt?
And Jamie reminded me, and now I almost forgot what I was going to say, but for me, the term equity really was new to me when Rosa Sheng, who was on that podcast with you, Lance.
That's the gal. Yes, thank you for
led the or she was really involved in the women in architecture, and at the time I think it was Equity by Design. Mm-hmm. National survey. It was a survey of the women. It started out with women in architecture, and then it grew into minorities and beyond as it year after year, and it grew in its data collection, really. And I think that's where I was thinking that there is the connection to like Black Lives Matter and that sort of equity versus equality is and this is where I've kind of forgotten what I was going to say. Jamie put it a lot better in that sense, but yeah. Well, yeah, I was hoping that he could re-inspire the
Jamie. Dang it!
I feel.
We do this from time to time. It's our banter, but
yeah.
I would say that in Texas, one of the things that sort of we've dealt with and that I've dealt with is that on the professional side is that like the Texas Society of Architects. I'm on a committee, and it was a task force before. They've had it for several years now. It's about 4 years in, and ironically, the AI in Michigan, as part of Black Lives Matter, decided, we're going to have that same task force, and so they're starting one now. So Texas, Texas as Texas can have its own mystique amongst other states. I would say that at least they had this committee, 4 years ago, and it was the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. But as much as they had it, there was things that committee did in terms of looking at what Kurt was referring to is the numbers, things that Rosa and and her group were, and others that she was working with were taking in terms of statistics. It's looking around the room. It's as simple as, when you're going to a conference or you're going to a meeting and you're looking around the room and you're seeing, that everybody's the same, for the most part, or that the percentages just don't line up with
society,
the rest of society.
Yeah.
Then, that should tell us all something. And so what's, these task force, these committees that are putting forth these numbers, it shouldn't really come as a surprise. But I think what the next step is, okay, acknowledge the numbers, but what are the actions? And I think that's the part of the discussion we're at now, which is great.
Just to clarify then, because that's where I get a little tripped up. And Kurt, you probably noticed that on the roundtables where I was very specific with Rosa, and I actually pointed out my personal anecdotal example of that. So is that where do you think that's where we're at? We've acknowledged the statistics, just call it that. And the lack of diversity that is reflective in society is not reflective in the profession or whatever, even another profession. I'm sure there's plenty of examples, right? We've done that, and now we're talking about what the action is, but there really hasn't been a full-on action. Do I have that correct? Because I want to know if there's specific example that these committees are coming up with, because I would like to talk about them further in detail about, honestly, okay, if we're going to do action A, what is the end game? Because for me, I want to know, specifically, for instance, Demetrius brought this up. He says, and Demetrius is a black architect, and he brought up the point that I think his statistic was like this: only 2% of architects that are African American or black in North America. But then, population wise, there's 13 to 15%, depending on the census and the year and everything like that. So then is the, for example, is whatever actions take place, if they're successful, once you get to the 13 to 15%, are the actions done? Or are they perpetual? I don't think it's fair in this discussion to not bring those kind of things up and look at it from a very big picture, a very holistic, full life, full circle thing. Are you guys still there? You cut out. Oh no. There you are. Now you're back.
I feel like we lost the, but Jamie, you heard enough?
I would say the one thing to think about is that, even in our profession, like in the state of Texas, there's 8 accredited schools of architecture. So there's 8 schools. One of those 8 is a historically black college. So it's an HBCU. Mm-hmm. I taught there. The majority of the students there, I'd say 90 to 95% of the population is African American. They're black students, who, for the most part, a lot of them are the first ones in their families to go to college. They're in an accredited school of architecture. They're going through the same. We're fortunate in our profession, and Kurt and I've joked about this. We're fortunate in our profession that wherever you go to school, everybody sort of has that same understanding of what you had to go through in architecture school.
I'd agree, yeah.
For the most part. There's obviously different things. But, the same thing would be true for these students at Prairie View A&M. But if you take that a step further and you say, okay, they all graduate with a degree, but then they don't necessarily get the same opportunity for employment, or if they do get that job, they're marginalized in some respects, and they start to not necessarily matriculate into further positions, in their firms, and then you start to add that up every level, every step along the way, and then you start to see that not only is it the profession, that needs to take actions, but the profession realizing that this pipeline of people that we're recognizing should be a part of our profession and aren't. It doesn't just start with their first job. It starts in school, and then not just in their university, but it starts in their communities, and how they're brought into the architecture profession. I mean, I've talked about it with other people, is that if you yourself, I mean, we already are in a profession where it's a fairly small percentage of people who are architects, I mean, in the professions. And a lot of the people who are exposed to it know an architect, or they've seen an architect, or they've had some exposure to it in their life. If people in a Black or brown community haven't necessarily been even exposed to the concept of an architect, then how can we expect them to have success in a field that they have no relationship to? And so there's questions about that I think are difficult ones that, kind of going back to your question of, if we get to a certain number, are we done? Maybe, but I think that, to get to that number, it's not just as simple as we need to have more job fairs or hire more people. There's a whole lot of steps down the chain that people really need to start thinking about.
It seems like the AIA could knock out two birds with one stone with this, where they could. I really wish one of the things that in the entree architect community we complain about a lot is that why doesn't the general public know what we do, right? And I know this has been a push over the past decade from the AIA, but that's one of their goals, is to really get it down to just a layperson's level and bring it out so it's more, people understand it. Could they do the same thing then in minority communities, where it's just educating about what does an architect do, and so it seems, so not only is the service more accessible, but the profession becomes more accessible that way. Has there been any, I'm not with the AIA, so I couldn't speak on whether if there's efforts being made to that or not. Can you guys, are there any?
The challenge, and this is, I just wanted to throw back in the item that I kind of forgot earlier, but the point about equity is akin to with the latest, Black Lives Matter protesting is the term, amplifying the melanated voices. There's so much air in the room being, coming out of, the privileged people, the white people, the non-Black and minority individuals, that it stifles, right, the voice of the minorities. And so I think getting to stepping back, if you are white or not the minority, and letting that voice come through, letting the melanated voices come through is one action. I mean, to recognize, right, in your own self. I mean, and I know, and I didn't realize this about you, Lance, is that you mentioned that you have Native American heritage, and I'm half Guatemalan from my mom's side, but my Neiswender last name is the German, American German guy, that married my mom. And I struggle with, like, my wife even asked me, like, did you ever have moments in life where you were, treated as a person of color and treated differently? And I thought about it. It took me a whole day to think about it. Mm-hmm. And the next thing, when I got back with my wife, I said, well, me, not so much, because my skin is a little lighter, being half my name, and I was born in this country, so I speak clear English, hopefully. Yeah. But my mother, being the immigrant, and my dogs are going bonkers.
That's all right.
I could see, even as a kid, I watched a lot of people discriminate against my mother because her accent, her darker skin. I think immediately they assumed she was not as smart because she couldn't, make a sentence the same way and things like that. So, I think, one thing about me living in the city of Flint and having been in different parts of the country, growing up in Connecticut and working in LA, I now am, in a city that is majority Black, primarily Black, and minority occupants, residents, citizens, and though the architecture, capital A architecture, is being designed by and for the 1% crowd, right? And so if we really need to, or really want to, I shouldn't say, we need to, and if they want to reach, toward, minority groups and become relevant to everybody, is you have to get away from.
I would say when you say minority, for me, like the way we run our firm is, it's not just skin color I'm talking about with minorities. I'm talking about the 99%, which yes, that's a majority, but that's the minority of our clients. And I would like to, like, our architecture is for everybody. I don't care if you're lower middle class. If you guys can, if we can make a deal, if we still can eat, doesn't mean it's the most profitable project, but like you deserve good architecture, right?
Right. Yeah. And I think that was my point getting to, is that you have to be able to, you have to set aside the sort of capitalistic mindset and think more about how can, to be relevant to that 99% group is, it's not about the money first. I mean, it has to be about something else. And so I don't know. I think Jamie was gonna.
No, I was just gonna say, and some of it is just education. I mean, for the practice. I mean, it's something as simple as, if you're going to architecture school, like we just sort of alluded that, everybody, wherever you went to school, there's some that have, higher pedigree of coursework that they took or whatever. So what? The thing that's sort of interesting is what built history are we talking about? I mean, did anyone take a pre-Columbian, architecture class, or was it all Western European history? And even those types of things, whether it's art or architecture, I mean, have certain influences on the people that you're educating. And I think that idea of, as Kurt's sort of alluding to, is, sort of taking a step back and analyzing your practice and seeing, how you're connecting with the broader community, and sort of how you're doing that, and what those opportunities are, whether you've done them well or the ones that you've missed and you recognize those misses. And, can you pivot to, a place where you try and do it better? And even just in some respects, it's sort of learning some terminology, and learning these, concepts that a lot of people are just reluctant to do. As surprising as it is, some of these things as they're being presented, they push back against a system. So when you hear about this, everyone sort of using the adjective systemic, for certain things, is that I think that even if you just look at the architecture profession as a system, and the pushback that, of change, oh, well, we've always done it this way, or, that's the way we do things, those types of, whatever it ends up being, if you're the one who's trying to make a change and you hear that, how that makes you feel. And so if you translate that feeling to your whole life, or something that's bigger and broader, then you're maybe getting closer to, understanding a little bit of that reality, regardless of the color of your skin, or where your family's from.
I recently reread and I watched the documentary about Sam Mockbee, and then I reread a book that I owned, about the rural studio, and my undergraduate is from USC in Los Angeles, so we basically were all trained to be the next Tom Main in school, right? I mean, everything that our drawings, our models were all like these buildings that would never stand up without massive structural packages. But now that I'm 40, right, I look back and I go, every architecture school should be more like the rural studio. You should be serving in a capacity like that, and building, designing and building, coming up with the solutions. I mean, that's one aspect, is understanding how things are built. And I know you guys have talked about that on Inside the Firm, but also then serving the people that really need architecture. Those that, don't have, if you watch the documentary, they don't have running water, in this country. we're not talking about third world nations. We're talking about this country.
Yeah. I really like the way this conversation sort of came around. Because to me, it just points to, it starts with us, right? I think Jamie hit the nail on the head with, as a practitioner and somebody who teaches at the university level, that's exactly where it starts from. Or even us just podcasting or us practicing. If the individual collectively can do so many things. So I think just broadening the way we think about things and not being reluctant to it. I'm very optimistic about the architecture profession. One of the reasons, and it moving forward in these, and us being less resistant to change and more open to sharing. And a lot of that has to do with what Mark LePage has built to the Entre Architect community. Like, what a breath of fresh air. I mean, it was just it's so crazy that we're supposedly supposed to be some of the most creative individuals on the planet, and we pigeonhole ourselves into not sharing and to these ideals and everything like that. So this was great. I'm really glad we kind of touched on these topics. We're kind of wrapping up on an hour here. It's been a little bit longer than usual, but you guys are fun to talk to. So I'm gonna finish with maybe one question for each of you, and if you could both answer them, that'd be great. And I'll start with Jamie. Jamie, knowing what you know now, and if you could travel back in time when you first started your career, what advice would you give yourself?
I think I would say to trust in my abilities. I think that's the one thing that it took me a long time to just, trust my instincts. I came at architecture from an art background. I didn't know an architect. We were just talking about that a moment ago. I had no perspective, no frame of reference for what an architect was. I'm the first in my family to go to college. I was born in another country. When I went to college and sort of discovered architecture, I didn't always trust my abilities and sort of trust that artistic instinct. And what I find now is that, the other things fell into place, and if I had sort of trusted myself and believed in that earlier, maybe some things would have been a little bit smoother, but I'm not one for going backwards in time. So I'm pretty pleased with the journey so far.
Yeah, but just so you know, everybody's answers for this question is always for people maybe starting their career. So then they can hear it from somebody else, and then hopefully they'll trust it.
Is trust yourself. I mean, trust in the fact that if you think you've found architecture, if you think you've found, the thing that drives your passion, then trust that. Don't give up on it. I mean, because I think that's the thing, is that, each of us takes a different path to where we want to be, and comparing ourselves to other individuals or some litmus test or timeline that somebody said or you read somewhere, that's not relevant. I think trusting your abilities and trusting in your own instincts is absolutely the best advice that I would have given myself. Wish I had trusted it more at times, but it's certainly something that I would share with other people.
Beautiful. Kurt?
Well, I have more time to think about that. So I was thinking that I would have I would tell myself to speak up more and be more active earlier. I kind of grew up pretty shy. I'm a twin, so I guess the two of us could hide each other. But as a shyer youth, and now kind of feeling a little more confident. Every step of my career toward getting licensed and things like that. Now I have a little more confidence and experience. But I think I would have told myself to just speak up and be a little more confident even back then, and eventually, and be more active, right? Get involved in other things that, just aside from going from your bed to studio, to food to bed to
yeah,
take a little time to do something a little different.
Don't be afraid to share with your peers. I mean, I think that's
yes.
Kurt and I've learned that lesson later in life, and it's something that we've certainly capitalized on.
Absolutely. Jamie, where can people follow you on your on social media?
At Fallout Studio on Instagram and Twitter, and then our podcast as well.
Beautiful. Kurt, how about you? Where can people follow you?
My Instagram and Twitter is my full name, Kurt Neiswender. That's Neiswender.
N-E-I.
Neiswender. We have the domain coffeesketchpodcast.com, which is basically just to host all our episodes there, but at Coffee Sketch on Twitter. So
beautiful. Boy, guys, it was a pleasure having you guys on. Well, I hope to meet you guys in person we were supposed to do this in LA, and then I would have got a tour from Kurt apparently. So we'll have to have beers or coffees or something when we can meet, hopefully next year when all of the pandemic is over with. Cross your fingers. So thanks again, guys. We'll talk soon.
Thanks
for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on the iTunes app. Tip your barista, and we'll see you next week for more Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm.